Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm Simon Vestwick.
And I'm Gemma Files, and this, of course, is No Darkness,
Darkness,
but
but
ours.
ours. Queerness in horror fiction, in its creators and in the fiction itself, is a huge part of the field. So much so that our recent podcast on the topic lasted almost an hour and a half in total, and at the end of it we realised we'd still barely scratched the surface. In particular, we'd focused primarily on male authors and perspectives, and completely neglected to talk about horror written by, for, or about queer women. We decided that needed to be put right, so sit back as we explore the rich and varied topic of lesbian horror.
So, really, when you think about it, horror provides an amazing amount of power for the powerless, and power for the non-default, and queer people, non-default. Queer people of all types, non-default. So when you think about the fact that, Carmilla, by J. Sheridan Fanu.
It's one of the great sort of lesbian horror sort of foundational thing.
Absolute foundational texts.
We were lamenting in the last podcast that we hadn't talked it, but I had my terrible confession is that at that time I actually hadn't read it. So wow. I'd made a point of, I knew, some of the basics of the basic premise and stuff, but it wasn't, until afterwards it was like, holy fuck, I actually need to get around to reading this goddamn thing, PDQ. And of course I did, and it's brilliant. But we
absolutely. So let's talk about it. The interesting thing is that Carmilla came out before Dracula.
Yes.
That Carmilla predates Dracula. And I gotta say, I like Le Fanu a lot. And, one of the things that I always found interesting about him was that he is very fascinated with creepy female characters. Recently I drew a picture of Madame Crowell from Madame Crowell's Ghost.
Oh, yeah.
You little limb, I'll tickle you till you're stiff. It's like he was really obsessed with, like, people who were once young and beautiful aristocrats and could do whatever the fuck they wanted and did awful things, and then what happens to a person like that as they get older. He was also obsessed with people who have gone insane for various reasons, usually because terrible things have been, practiced against them. And, there are like 5 or 6 Le Fanu stories that are built around a person who either is a ghost or a person who just behaves like a ghost, and that person is usually female, which is kind of interesting. It's usually like one female person, being trapped by another weird female person who sort of shows her what could happen to her at some point. It's like, if things don't turn out, you might be this person.
Yeah. And of course, I think in Carmilla, I mean, I think obviously we're going to be discussing some of these, a number of these texts in some depth. It's fair to sort of say that we're going to be spoilers here for people who haven't read. Anyway, so if like me until recently, you haven't read Carmilla, then go away, read it, and then come back.
Yes, because everyone should read Carmilla. Everyone. Yes. And certainly everyone who's interested in vampires should read Carmilla. It's like the impact of Carmilla on movies and other books and, and other stories has often been, as I've said, in that kind of fetishistic way. It's like if you watch Hammer's The Vampire Lovers, you will see a lot of people trying
getting the boobs out, basically.
And they're really trying to, all the women who are involved are really trying to make a good film. And Peter Cushing certainly is trying to make a good film, trying not to look at the boobs. But it's really hard because it is like, it's like, yep, get him out. It's like not quite as bad as Twins of Evil, where the Twins of Evil are pretty much the Mammaries. It's like, how can I tell that woman is a witch or possibly a vampire? It's because she has large boobs and they are barely covered. Barely covered. But
I think we'd both be in trouble.
I know.
I got the moves, It's
like, all they are is dying stars. They're just bags of yellow fat. Anyway, but okay, but the story Carmilla is very different. The story Carmilla absolutely reads like a discovery that, here's our main character, whose name I've forgotten, Laura. Yeah, our main character, Laura, who we are introduced to. She lives in Styria. She is, I believe the daughter of a doctor. I may be wrong.
No, I'm not quite sure what it says. But the doctor is a sort of a friend of the family. I'm not quite sure what it says. Her father.
It's probably just like a landholder of some type. And she, and she's very alone. She's an only child. She has no mom. Yeah. She's brought up in this very close relationship, with her dad, but it's a very Victorian relationship, and she's
she was in the Austrian service and retired upon a pension.
That's it. And so she's, she's quiet, she's well educated, she's, but there's nothing in her life that is, like super fascinating. She has a couple of friends that she barely sees because they live somewhere else. She writes to people a lot. And she has this dream that has been with her since the beginning of her childhood, where she is afraid that something is in the room with her. She thinks it's a cat, a horrible, huge cat. And then she cries out for comfort, and a beautiful woman comes in and picks her up, and then she clutches her, to her chest, hugs her intimately, and then she feels these two terrible needles driven into her breast. It's like, and this begins when she's a kid, so it's like, so it's this interesting kind of thing where you're like, it's a nightmare, but it's kind of pleasurable at the same time. And I'm like, oh, what does this sound like? Sort of sounds like, lying in bed, discovering your genitals, that you fiddle with yourself for a while, and then, something happens, and it's sort of like dying, and it's sort of amazing, I'm always fascinated by the terminology that people culturally have for orgasm. How most people are like, I'm coming, throughout the European half of the world, and throughout the Asian half of the world, it's like, I'm going. Literally true. And
it's like about the people about there are the three schools of people. When people are having an orgasm, they fall into three categories: the positive, the negative, the religious. Oh yes, oh no, and oh god.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And there is something that is, that is fascinating about that moment where you realize that you can do that to yourself, and it opens you up, and and then you begin to realize what it is that you're attracted to, and it's like it's that movement from, oh, if I'm on the school bus and I sit in a certain place, feels great, I like press up against the dishwasher. It's kind of amazing, and then it becomes like, Bob is weirdly, I want to be around Bob, and I don't know why, because he's an asshole. Or maybe I want to be around Roberta, and I don't know why.
Yeah,
he's kind of an asshole. I just want to hug Roberta all the time. Just like roll down a hill with Roberta.
And have the added pleasure, of course, when they're when they're discovering what works, especially if they're sitting on the bus in a certain position, is, oh, when it's your stop and you have to get up, and that's you've got to kind of you're heading for the steps looking like Quasimodo. I remember this actually happened to me in class at school on one occasion. I can't remember. I don't know if I was thinking about anything erotic in particular, or if it was just the fact that, I was like, I don't know, 14, 15, and my blood was 90% hormones, and I just basically found myself with a non-negotiable stalk on, just when I had, at the point when the teacher was saying, best come and get your exercise book for the front of the class. It was
so you didn't even have the exercise book to, like,
Yeah, it was kind of poaching the front of are you all right? But yeah, just my back's a bit sore.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm fine. Yeah, and this, of course, is part of, female sexuality, which is kind of interesting, that you can hide everything, that you can, it's like it's inside of you. And kind of,
often that can be, and that can a distinct advantage when so often culturally you need to, you're not supposed to have,
I mean, I've listened to people talk about how that strange thing where it's like you're expected to be heterosexual and to be interested in guys, but you're also expected, you're also not supposed to profess any interest in guys.
Yes.
It's like, it's okay to like that guy who is just a poster on your wall, but it's not okay to like that guy who's over there and be like, I want to rub myself on you, or whatever. And
but it's kind of, you've got to be this sort of unattainable. You've got to be his unattainable object of affection to sort of.
Yes.
You can choose to give your favors, kind of thing, but you can't pursue him.
Yes, exactly. And how weird it is, for example, to be asexual in a super heteronormative society. There are people that I've listened to talk about realizing that not just that they were lesbians or that they were gay, but that they were actually asexual in a society like a super Baptist environment where it's all about you get bigger and then you marry somebody and then you have kids until your uterus falls out. Okay, so back to Carmilla. So Laura is has this sort of thing that's bubbling inside of her, and she doesn't really understand it. She thinks it's just a nightmare. She thinks it's just a weirdly interesting nightmare that she keeps having over and over. And but interestingly, then her father and she are alerted to the fact that there has been a carriage wreck outside of their house. Yeah. And this woman comes in and who claims to be an aristocrat. Does she say she's a countess? I think she does.
Countess, yeah. And she's got to go. She's got to be on her way somewhere else.
Yes.
And her daughter, somebody needs to look after her daughter.
Someone needs to look after her daughter who's been knocked out in the carriage ride. She doesn't think that she's, like terribly hurt, but she has to keep going. And someone needs to look after her daughter, and her daughter is Carmilla. And Carmilla is, so we're introduced to Carmilla. And again, this is very interesting within the context of female sexuality. We're introduced to Carmilla as a sleeping person, as a person who is almost in a coma. So she's in the same situation that Laura was in when she had the dream. And when she opens her eyes, she's like, oh, this vision of loveliness, Laura, who's like, leaning over me, it's like, and then she claims that she has had a dream since she was a child.
Yeah.
Which is the opposite, which is the same dream, but the person who comes in and comforts her is Laura.
Yeah, it's the same dream with the roles reversed, basically.
Yes, exactly. The same dream with the roles reversed. So it's fairly obvious that Carmilla has something to do with this dream that Laura's been having, but it's never made clear whether or not Carmilla has that kind of power. So
I think it's kind of, because obviously it's very hard to be reading, just even to go into it, to start reading it without obviously guessing beforehand Carmilla's a vampire, because we all, anyone, the original readers wouldn't have known that, but
the original readers would have been like, is she a lesbian? And then they would be like,
what's a lesbian?
Oh, she's a vampire.
Is that better? Is that worse? But I mean, on another level, I mean, of course, because in real terms, Carmilla is far, far older than Laura, and the whole person. I mean, the whole. I mean, to what extent the relationship between Laura and Carmilla, how much real emotional attachment is it there on Carmilla's side, or is it just a kind of, because it's in many ways respect she's grooming her.
Yeah, no, she's totally grooming her. This is interesting as well. Particularly when you think about things like Let den Ratte come in, and the recent adaptation of Let the Right One In, not Let Me In, but Let the Right One In, where the main vampire character Eleanor enters it not just centuries older, but like older in that she's been a vampire for 10 years, so she looks like she's 12, but she's actually 22. And her father at one point takes her aside and says, Zaya's a little kid. You get that, right? You are not actually a little kid, and Zaya is a little kid. Yeah. It's like he thinks he loves you, and you think you love him, but there's something a little bit weird about that.
I suppose there's a bit of that in Interview with the Vampire as well, and that Claudia is always going to have the body of a child, even as she matures as a person.
Yes.
So you've got a mind that's decades or centuries old inside, a body that look. I mean, of course, I don't know I don't think Claudia has. Does Claudia have? It's been so long since I read the book. I don't know if Claudia's character can be said to have have a sexuality as such. I mean, on a physical level, she wouldn't have been able to.
In the most recent one, she's around like 15 when she gets turned into a vampire. So she definitely has a sexuality. She is having sex with a guy and drains him at the same time. So her sexuality is always, comes. Yeah, and it's always
the novel is because this was partly inspired by the daughter that Rice lost, wasn't it?
Exactly, and that version of Claudia, I think, is in love with Louis, but Louis is like a full-grown man, and by the time that she dies, she is a full-grown woman inside of a little girl's body.
Yeah,
and that's always the way it's going to be, But I think they do love each other in that way.
Yeah. Ellie in Let the Right One In kind of. I mean, whereas Claudia's kind of a tragic figure in the sense that she's, she has the mind of a grown woman, but the body of a child, and so she can never, even as a vampire, really
survive on her own.
Yeah, she can't live the life in terms of a relationship. She can't. But Ellie kind of turns that to her advantage, because she basically cultivates a sort of. Basically a paedophile to be her protector.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, that's absolutely true. And the horrible, the horrible thing is that as Hakan becomes useless to her, that she transfers that to the kid, and who she is grooming in his turn to become her friend and her helper, but eventually she knows as they enter that relationship that he's going to age into a guy like Hakan.
Yeah.
A guy who has imprinted himself on a little child, or.
I mean, it's a little bit, I mean, as in Doctor Who, he sort of says to Billy Piper's character, I think in the first season, I can, you can spend the rest of your life with me, but I can't spend the rest of my life with you.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and I always wondered whether, a Schilder, the character who gets stuck at the age of the actress who plays Arya Stark,
Maisie Williams,
stuck at the age of Maisie Williams forever. Whether she's sort of like an echo of the Doctor in a weird way. because she certainly, as an immortal, not a vampire, but an immortal, goes through that whole thing where it's sort of like, I just don't, I can't care about people. It's like, there's no point. There's just no fucking point caring about people, and the doctor's like, oh, come on. You have to care about people. It's like, but it hurts. Yes, it has to hurt.
Returning to, yeah, we were saying Carmilla was kind of like effectively.
Okay. Yeah, so Carmilla is effectively grooming Laura. Yeah, it's like she sees that thing in Laura, which one assumes is queerness, and she reaches in there and she's like, it's like, I'm gonna, and there's often this sense with vampires that, and certainly around this time period when vampirism first becomes like a trope, there's this feeling that vampires can look inside people, that they are a bit telepathic, maybe not, telepathic, like they can talk to you in your brain, but, that they can sort of see your thoughts, sort of see your wants, sort of see your feelings, the things that are most important to you, and they shape themselves to them. Definitely the vampires have that, that thing which later becomes the glamour, which, where they can sort of hypnotize you. And they give you what you want.
Yeah.
And that hypnotizing, as we see with Dracula's wives, is always sexually based. It's always like attractiveness. So it's like, oh, I have a girlfriend. I am supposed to get married. Is boobs. Boobs and teeth.
The glamour of the boobs.
And the teeth. Teeth inside the lips. Anyway, so okay, so we're introduced to
just backtracking a little bit.
Sorry.
Is that what she's, as we saying, she's got pen friends. There was one friend who was supposed to be due to visit her, and then she got ill and died.
Yes.
Unless there's something that comes back to, as it were, bite.
Yes. Yes. Thank you very much. Yeah, the general's daughter was supposed to come see her, and and then she died, and it was very mysterious. Anyway, so
had a bit of it that she'd had this very strong attachment to, so potentially because Carmilla seemed, because
Millarca.
Yes. One of the things we're told about the vampires is that they will, with most people, most victims, they will just finish them off in one go or in a couple of nights. But there will be people for whom they do actually conceive some sort of they probably call it love in the same way that like a paedophile would call their attraction to a child love. Yes. It's not, it's pernicious and destructive, but that's not how they rationalize it. But those kind of interactions with the vampire are far more prolonged and drawn out, and they make them last as long as possible. I can't remember.
And this, of course, is another thing that is difficult, where you're looking for queer representation, and you yourself are queer, and you're like, am I supposed? It's like, on the one hand, power and a queer relationship, and quite a tragic queer relationship in an odd way, and incredible emotional dynamics. And on the other hand, you are clearly telling me that this is perverse and destructive and awful. You are clearly telling me that, okay, so anyway, so Carmilla is introduced to us as this very languid figure, a person who always seems to be, she saunters, she moves slowly, she almost seems to be half asleep half the time.
She's never up before like 11 o'clock in the morning. If
she isn't wounded by sunlight, but she's not exactly at her best when the sun's up. And and she's also she's dark-haired. She has wonderful masses of dark hair. She has beautiful dark eyes. She looks to be exactly the same age as Laura, and she beautiful color, which is kind of interesting. She's not, pale. She's got incredible color, like rosy color. And she's a goth. she is a super goth, you know, because she is very, very obsessed with death. It's like she doesn't want to hear, you know, she doesn't want to hear church bells. She doesn't want to be around graves. You know, she almost has like an obsession with it where, you know, she's afraid of it. You know, she doesn't want to be around the, you know, it's like, oh, take that cross away with that horrible man, you know, nailed to it. You know, it's not about, I mean, one assumes she probably doesn't like it because she's a vampire and, you know, the power of God and everything. Power of Christ compels her. But at the same time, I also think that she doesn't like it because it reminds her that she's dead. You know, and that no matter how much she loves Laura, or she doesn't love Laura, how much she wants Laura, or she doesn't want Laura, that whatever she does with Laura is going to end up in Laura's death. And, you know, that, you know, which is the sort of the orgasmic, you know, climax of their relationship, but at the same time, then she's dead.
You know? I thought if it was a goth, I'm now imagining sort of a film adaptation with Gemma Ortega as
well,
either as Laura or as Carmilla. She could work as either one.
Perfect.
Maybe I did a bit of a double take when I realised that Gemma Ortega was the same girl who played the little church mouse character in X.
Yes, exactly. I know.
It was like, I know her. Where have I seen her before? It's like, oh shit!
Yeah. So, you know, Carmilla is like, absolutely, she wants to be with Laura all the time. And Laura wants to be with Carmilla all the time because Carmilla is so magnetic. And also because Laura wants a friend. And she, you know, it's like she was going to have her friend come over and visit her, but then her friend died, you know, and she knows nobody. You know, it's like everybody else is an adult. Everybody else is, you know, everybody else lives in a world that she's not really privy to. You know, and she's alone a lot of the time. And, you know, and then she's got Carmilla, and Carmilla wants to hold her hand all the time. Carmilla wants to press her to her breast. She wants to braid her hair, you know, and she wants to say, you know, you must not think me cruel if I hurt you. It's only because I love you. And, you know, it's like your life is so precious to me. You must die, sweetly die into mine. And, you know, and she's sort of like, wow, that's weird. Okay.
So this is kind of going on, and I think she's starting to become a bit ill herself, isn't she?
Yeah, and she is, because she starts having the dream again, and the dream becomes more and more threatening, and it is a cat, you know, climbing onto her bed and resting on her chest like a night hag, and then fighting her very deeply. And then, you know, and she starts to wake up feeling utterly exhausted, and, you know, and her blood is draining away, and, you know, and they start, you know, like bringing in people to, you know, give her beef broth and stuff like that. And
there were two doctors, I think, and one of them is basically sort of is like, oh, for God's sake, what superstitious crap are you spouting to the other one? And the other one's like, this is basically, write something down. This is look into this, basically, to
vampirism.
Yes, exactly.
Could be vampirism.
And then the general kind of comes on the scene, the father of the old man who was the father of this friend of hers who died, and you basically discover how basically the same thing happened between his daughter and
her friend
Carla.
Is it Mercala or Merlarsa? I don't know.
It's one of the two. It's basically she's always got to use like an anagram
of her name. Yes. Yeah. I mean, her original name, I think, was Mercala.
Yeah, or it might have been right. Yeah, but anyway, she was one of the events. But I mean, we're told early on that there's a ruined village not far from the Schloss where Laura and her father live, and there's formerly the domain of an aristocratic family called the Karnsteins, who were now all extinct.
Extirpated, that they were, you know.
Yes. And of course the Karnsteins are in fact, and it becomes clear. I think there's a painting that the general had done that was done when Mercala or Millarca was a guest at the general's house, and it's of course the image of Carmilla, who basically pulls a very quick vanishing act, but the general has of course vowed to dedicate the remainder of his days to
finding
and destroying whatever killed his little
Yeah.
girl.
Yes.
And they find the tomb, open it, and she's floating there in blood.
Yes.
Full of blood. And they hammer a stake through her heart and chop off her head, and she screams a lot. And the thing is, I mean, interestingly, because of course, it's indicated that that the other Karnsteins are still very much around and vampiring, because presumably that was
Yeah.
the elder Countess Karnstein who dropped Carmilla off at the
Well,
castle.
it's an interesting question, because I personally think that, you know, it's just as likely that the elder countess might not be a countess at all. She might be a Renfield. She might be a ghoul. You know, like a live helper who, you know, totes, you know, the Hakan of the story. You know,
totes Carmilla from place to place. Conveniently has an accident, or conveniently finds a way to, because she approaches I think the general tells that she basically approached him at a masked ball and kind of insisted that she recognized him. He was like, and he was in that position of I'm not quite sure. I can't place this woman, but
but certainly she is beautiful and aristocratic, and you know,
she's very sure we've met, and I don't want to appear rude by saying, you know, who the fuck are you exactly, love? You know.
Well, you know, which makes total sense if he's Peter Cushing, which he is in The Vampire Lovers.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much how a lot of con artists will work and try and you know, they'll often approach someone, insist they're like an old school friend. I mean, I used to work in financial services, worked for an insurance company, and for a while, and briefly for work for a bank, and so we were given a great deal of instructional material on you know, on, because obviously the big thing is fraud, and the big thing is people will try and use us. You know, people. You know, there will be people who will try to who may well try to find ways to get customer information out of you, because you've got customers' financial information. And I think one of the scenarios where they could do it was these people, you know, somebody would approach you, pretend to be like an old friend, strike up a relationship, and then usually try and talk you into doing something for them. And of course, once you'd compromised you a bit, then they had you over the barrel and could just make you keep on doing it. And
that's another thing that we see with the story of Carmilla, that, you know, Carmilla doesn't overpower people the way that Dracula does. You know, she doesn't have that immediate authority of being a man. You know, you know, she's got really good manners, and and she's beautiful, and she's obviously aristocratic, but she's playing that role of being, you know, it's like, oh, help me, I'm sick, help me, I'm helpless, you know, I'm female, and therefore I have to approach you from the side, I have to use my wiles, I have to seduce you, I have to insert myself into, I have to feign vulnerability and insert myself into your life that way, you know, so that you're doing something nice for me, you're being good to me, you know.
My strength is my apparent weakness, basically.
That's right. My strength is my apparent weakness, and you know, the fact is, she's everything that Dracula is.
And we conclude our discussion of Carmilla in the next episode, in which we'll also be discussing Elizabeth Bathory, the horror fiction of Vernon Lee, and film adaptations of Carmilla, including Emily Harris's 2019 version starring Jessica Raine and Hannah Ray. All that and much more in next week's episode. And until then, I have been Simon Bestwick.
And I remain Gemma Files.
And
this of course, was
No Darkness
But Ours.
Ours.